Right, we're back on schedule. So the next presentation will be led by Steve, building the perfect pilot program. So Steve has with him on the panel Dr. Himidine Toure from Guinea, the Prime Minister's office. We've got Innocent Muhizi. We've got, Dr. Himidine and John Muthioria.
These are quite low. You can't see anybody in the back. All right. That was an amazing presentation about tips. Thank you, Jane, for leading that. A couple of things I want to just highlight on that before we move into this is that was incredibly exciting. The BOT is going to publish their journey. I hope that they know that tomorrow we're going to be talking about our Mojo journey, which is part of Pillar 1. And so please join that, and please join the Pillar, the work stream. And I'd like to also highlight something great that Innocent Ephraim said about great way of putting it, that BOT had the courage to say, we're going to do this. And for being the person who actually speaks to a lot of central bankers about and hub operators and countries of what they want to do, it's amazing of how much we're aligned with their vision, but very few of them have the courage. They always say, we'll wait until a couple other ones have done it and then we'll come do it. So very exciting. I mean, it was the perfect thing to say. Yes, amazing that they had the courage to say that. Amazing that Rwanda has had the courage to say, we're going to do it as well. So that leads into what we want to talk about today, which is the first step in building that courage. The first step in failing, as Innocent Muhizi so rightly said, is pilots and POCs. And so, like Jane said, we don't want people to fail on the same things. We want to learn from that as a community. That's the whole purpose of an open source community, is that we can learn and share those experiences with others. And so what I want to talk about today with this panel, before I allow you guys to introduce yourselves, is that we've done a number of pilots and POCs, but in our partnership, particularly with Africanunda, we have seen how many countries are very interested and how many hub operators are very interested in testing out the system and doing a pilot. We want to make sure that those pilots are done as smoothly and efficiently as possible. In large part because, going back to another thing that Innocent Muhizi said, we've been talking to each other for the past 3 years. Nia and I have been working together on that pilot phase for about 2 years. We don't want everyone else to go through that. It's fine. It takes time. But let's cut that down if we can, because 2 years is too long to work on a pilot until we go live. Let's cut that time down. And so the point of today is, how can we build the best pilot possible? And what kind of time should we look at for a pilot to make sure that we learn everything we need to learn? Everyone who needs to be involved learns everything they need to learn so that we can very quickly move to the next phase without interruption, without it taking 2 or 3 years, and so that we can actually start delivering services to citizens. Because 2 years is too long, 3 years is too long. So that's the purpose of today, is to bring some panelists who've actually done POCs both with Mojaloop and without, to talk about their experiences. And together with John, we're going to talk about how we can take that to the next phase. So with that, I want to move on down the line and allow you guys to introduce yourselves. Thanks.
Thanks, Steve. My name is Nyi. I'm CEO of the Sawox. As Steve said, we're using Mojaloop as a pilot in Myanmar. We are implementing an interoperable payment platform called WinePay using Mojaloop, and very happy to share our experience. And also, like Steve said, want to help those who wants to cut this down into a much shorter time frame to get a POC or a pilot up and running.
I'm Himidine. I'm the advisor to the Guinean Prime Minister in charge of telecommunications and new technologies. So since last October, after the Zanzibar meeting, we start to implement Mojaloop in Guinea. And I would like to mention as well that Guinea is the first country, one of the first countries to fully implement Mozip. So we have a an open source as a national ID system. And today we want to learn from different experience and see how we can implement Mojaloop as our national financial ID, financial services system.
Yeah, sorry for the glitch. My name's Kalisa Fazad. I work with Arrowswitch, and I'm happy I've met so many people, but not face-to-face, but on emails and online calls. I've had a pleasure of working with Mojaloop into a POC, where we're trying to look at how we can implement the merchant here in Rwanda. But also, we've also, as Arrowswitch, we're working on an interoperability platform whereby we are connecting all participants, all financial institutions in Rwanda, be it mobile operators, financial institutions, banks, MFIs, and SACCOs. And actually, we've implemented already the wallet-to-wallet. That is between the two mobile networks that are operating in Rwanda. And this has been into the market at least for almost half a year. I think it's six months from last year. And right now we're now connecting the banks also to join the two mobile networks. I'm also happy that I'm going to learn more, and especially with working with Mojaloop on the implementation of the other use cases, especially on the POC that we worked on together, and see how best we can move on. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is John Mudiora, and I'm a technical payment specialist with African Enda. It's a pleasure to be here. We're working with a number of you on your initiatives on instant and inclusive payments to ensure that we reach as many of those who are financially excluded in our countries and regions as possible on the continent. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. And this is a great panel. Thank you so much. And so John and I are very excited to hear what you guys have to say, because we have a number of countries who are interested in this, and we definitely want to make sure that we are properly allocating resources and learn as much as we can to get people on a good path. I think, generally most people here work on payments, and I think what Innocent said of the bizarre excitement that we face when we see a transaction actually initiate from one institution and end at another institution. It is exciting, but it's exciting because it's so complicated, because so much went into making that happen. And so I think that's what I'm kind of curious to know is, what are the things in before we get into that, this panel is called the Creating the Perfect Pilot, but a lot of people, everyone's saying the word POC. I'd like to get each panelist, except for John, let's hear it from the three of you. What is the difference between a pilot and a POC? Me.
Okay, I think the main difference is the scope, right? I mean, this is my interpretation, but please correct me if I'm wrong. I think the POC would be a piece of technology that we would start, test, experiment, but within our own organizations, right? I think when we started talking about pilot, I think we started involving other financial institutions, perhaps even their users in a limited scope. We still want to be, very safe in testing, but in the pilot that we're doing, for example, together with UNCDF and with the support from Infotix and other technology colleagues, including Mojaloop Foundation, we are now testing with a real life money with selected users from licensed financial institutions, but still a pilot phase, right? Whereas, right, we have done many POCs where that does not go beyond our technology providers' fence, right? So I think that's the main difference in my book.
Okay, great, Dr. Medine, and not just with Mojaloop, but also with most of the other POCs and pilots that you've done.
Yeah, in Guinea, I think we have different challenges when it's come to implement the POC. So the context of financial services is slightly complex because we have at least 20 banks with 180 agencies. We have also 25 MFIs, microfinancial institutions. We have 5 operators for 14 million people. So definitely when you have different stakeholders, it's not easy to align them on the same goals, on the same projects. So for us, one thing is to have the top support management. Like for starting this pilot, we had discussion with the Prime Minister himself to show him that is very important to get him involved in the pilot implementation. And as a second step, we had discussion with different stakeholders, facilitate communication with them, define with them the goals, and see how we can use this POC as innovative solution for them. So we also learned from Africanenda. We had last week 3 days discussion with John where in Guinea, was in Guinea. We had some discussion with different partners, central bank, representative of IMF, banks, and mobile monies operators. So it's very important to have these discussions, define goals, and see how you can build your teams.
I want to park what you said about defining goals. That's going to be the main point of this. I really want to focus on it. So thank you for bringing it up. So, Hafizat, the difference for you of a POC and a pilot, and you articulated it quite well earlier. So if you can go through that a little bit.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think to me personally, a POC is a how. How are you going to implement something that you think that is going to bring a change? And in this case, it's an idea that you've come up with, that you're building, and you have to prove that this idea is actually it's going to bring the change that you're looking to. For example, Innocent said about exchanging transactions when you transaction messages from one institution to another. That doesn't mean that those messages, it's real money. It's not real money. It's just a message. And it's to make sure that, yes, if our aim was to enable a transfer of funds from one institution to another, it means if those messages are being exchanged, you've achieved your goal. But now you've tested that. When it comes to the pilot, now you're going to put the POC into the normal transaction, that is physical transaction. When you're piloting, you've tested everything in the POC, the message types, the transaction time frame, the notifications, and during the pilot phase, you want to actually know that whatever we've tested in the POC is working in the physical environment, in the production environment. That if this one is working within this set period of time, and you're confident that it's serving the purpose, now you're able to roll out the product to the market. And I think I'll go by experience during the pilot phase. You talked about 2 years. And for me, when I did a pilot for 6 months, I was scared. I thought as a project manager, I had failed. So hearing from you 2 years, I think it builds my confidence. But again, it shouldn't go to that to that level, because a pilot is just a monitoring phase. That's what I can say. You monitor what you've put into the production. the messages, the system behavior, because some of the systems, you can configure the system to maybe process certain number of transactions per second, per minute. And then when you go into production, that system, when it has those transactions, it freezes. So all that, it's just monitoring during the pilot phase. It's monitoring the behavior of the system. If there's any in terms of transaction, especially when it's a transfer from one institution to another, you look at the time frame. Is it good? Is it convenient to the end user? You look at the notification messages, because when you're looking at payments, we are also looking at the instant. For it to be instant, for it to be instant, it's when I, as a sender, I've received a notification telling me that my transaction has been successfully sent to Bank A, and the recipient should also receive an instant notification telling them that they've received a transaction. So the experience that we had during the pilot phase, one of the issues, and actually the one that delayed the actual rollout to the market, was the notification part, because it has to be instant, and that's why the scope of the whole R&D base that we've been implementing, it's if the transaction is instant, then everything should be instant, then including the notification. And that when I receive a notification, that's the proof that, for example, if I'm paying you money and I've received the notification that I've done the transaction, I will show that to you, I've received the transaction. If you've not received a notification from your side, then there could be an issue from your account, and perhaps you can check with the institution, or even follow up on that. But at least there's that finality that the transaction has gone through, and I've closed it within in an instant period. So to me, that's the difference. Pilot is you've done the POC and you passed, but the POC. The POC is the testing period, the testing phase of the messages and whatever. It is the how, but the pilot is the when. When can we now roll out to the whole market? Thank you.
Okay. John, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
No, Steve, actually, I think they've covered different aspects quite well.
Okay.
Thanks. Yeah.
I'd like to use what Hafizad was saying, and for the purposes of today, let's talk about POC as technical, more testing. Pilot would be something where it's actually in a production environment for the financial institutions. Let's use the term POC to talk about that first step, the first thing you're going to do to say, okay, I've heard about this instant payments thing. I've heard about interoperability. I've heard about Mojaloop. I want to test something, or to use Innocent's term, I want to fail on something because I want to learn on something. And let's use that as the term POC for that. And so cancel the panel on pilots. So that's what I'd like to focus on, is what are we trying to learn? But let's break that up a little bit. One of the differences, and you brought this up, one of the differences of the identity with MOSA POC versus a payment POC is there's a lot of, you have to also think about the financial institutions, different classes of financial institutions, central bank, the hub operator, the Ministry of ICT. There's a lot of different institutions that may or may not be involved in that first phase. So very critical for me, what's the level of involvement of the financial institutions, and what do you want them to learn? So we had a great experience with the MFIs and the wallets with our pilot, or with our POC originally. Talk about, if you can answer that question, what's the level of involvement, and why is that the level of involvement for financial institutions?
Sure. I think it's critical because, without the financial institutions' interest or support, I don't think we can run something like this. Very likely in Myanmar, we currently have 34 organizations who have signed letter of commitment, right, to join WinePay, which is the name of our interoperable payment platform, which is in the final phase. We call this a friendly user testing phase right now, and we're waiting for the regulatory support for the closed user group testing, which is the next phase. This 34 organizations includes 11 wallets, 20 MFIs, one NBFI, non-bank financial institutions, and also the international NGOs, like World Food Program and Cord Aid, who wants to also test the system for their beneficiary payments. Right? So it's not just financial institutions; there are also other support. I think that traction is really crucial for us, so that we could prove to the regulators and others that there is a demand from the industry for a system like this. I think the need for real-time payment is very clear. We don't need to sell anybody, right? But the interoperability is very hard because there are some market players with a very large share, and that interoperability does not always is on their priority list, right? But without that support, we cannot do that. And because we want to actually connect their systems to Moja Loop, and so the two use cases that we have started as a focus are the microfinance loan repayments and disbursement, and what that means that the wallets and the core banking systems used by the microfinance institutions has to be connected. So we really need their support. We need the support of their vendors, their technology providers, and without that, we won't be able to do that.
So yeah, I just brought up a whole bunch of stakeholders, and then you brought up another one, which is the vendors of all of these stakeholders, which is a whole nother category. Okay, a whole nother level of complication. Dr. Himidin, in our conversations about your POC, you would like to include microfinance as well in your POC. Can you explain why it's important for you for that?
Yeah, first of all, we have, as I said, 25 microfinance institution in Guinea, and over 65,000 agencies, and plenty of them don't have a core banking system. So definitely do need technical support to develop a core banking system. And as services, we have a lot of opportunities because they want as well some services like cash in, cash out, merchant payments, and also interoperabilities between different type of financial services like MFI to mobile wallet, MFI to MFI, MFI to banks, and MFI to insurance services. So it's kind of how can I say? It's kind of they don't have a lot of innovative services, so we have to build from scratch something like that. We have to build from scratch with them. So,
yep, and that's in building that from scratch. The learnings are going to be incredible. So I hope you have talked to the FitzWorks folks and the Infotix guys who've supported them. There's a lot of learnings in that. Afzad, what do you think on not just what's the level? Like, yes, you need them involved. What's the level of involvement, and what are the challenges of getting them involved in a POC?
Thank you so much. I think one of the challenges, I think even the Tanzania team was here and they mentioned it, was when a project or a POC is involved, if there are two stakeholders involved within that project, it becomes much more easier. Not when you involve many stakeholders, because many stakeholders will be having a lot of, for example, the business idea, the business case. As they mentioned also, there are those bilaterals that they already have in place. So putting them together to have the same understanding is always a very big challenge. And I've gone through this experience whereby we sit in one room and we're talking about interoperability, but you find, yes, they understand interoperability and its meaning, but the problem comes on how to implement it. How are we going to implement it in terms of the finances? Because it requires a lot of investment. And also, they've already implemented that bilateral. For example, if MTN is already connected to BK, there's that bilateral. But again, that is limited to only BK customers and MTN customers. It's not open to other financial institutions. So when you're doing a POC, you need to include all these participants, engage with them, start with them from the word go, move with them because we learn from each other. You can be having an idea, but once you sit in the same room with different stakeholders, they also give in their ideas. So you put together the ideas, the ones that, for example, that the government of Rwanda had in mind, the central bank had in mind, and also in relation with what the industry has. Then you put them together. At the end of it, you have a consensus on how and why you're going to implement a POC. So yes, you need to involve them from the word go. You need to learn from each other to let their ideas in, but also you need to set goals. If you bring in a POC and I'm bringing this product and you can't define why you're bringing this product into the market, then you're going to have a lot of hardships. So you need to give a case study of why you're bringing in this idea. And you have to also to make sure that the stakeholders buy it. So I think that's that's the most important part.
John, do you want to add?
I think I'd also add some level of maybe complexity to the discussion as well. We are discussing primarily domestic or local systems. And one of the issues we are having to also address is what does this mean when it is now for a regional interoperable system? How do these issues work when you have regulators in two different countries or multinational banks, multinational mobile money providers, or microfinance institutions who are domestic or local, and how you need to integrate them? A second question that you've raised is there are not just regulators, but multiple regulators. So in some cases, you have different regulators overseeing or supervising banks versus MFIs and mobile money operators. How do you coordinate that and the complexity it has at a domestic and a regional level? And then I would say the third question, and maybe it's an even more fundamental question, has been the question of, by interoperable, do we mean interbank? And if we mean that we are connecting more than banks as equal opportunity participants in a real-time payment system, what does that mean in terms of how you will successfully drive messages end to end, the standard you will have for communicating, and how you validate success for a POC or a pilot. And then finally, I think Connie brought out the aspect of how integrations are done. So some institutions have internal capacity, some depend on a regional or group office, and then others will have a vendor who would participate and support them in driving integration. And so also that needs to be coordinated depending on what each financial institution needs. Thanks.
Thank you. And I think, that vendor question is something that has come up in every single POC. And I think Office said it perfectly because in the end, the relationship between the DFSP and their vendor, and if you can't convince the DFSP why participating in this POC is in their interest, there's no way they're going to be willing to pay their vendor to do the integration or to do anything that's part of this POC. So that sounds like a pretty important lesson that we've all probably learned the hard way, is start with making sure that the DFSPs are convinced. There's one other section discussion I want to get into, but before we get off of DFSPs, you also brought up a great point of they all need to be involved, but too many people can also make it very difficult. And we had with the early days of WinePay, MMD back then, I mean, there was at least 15 or 20 financial institutions initially are observing, but not all participating in the POC in that first stage. How did you manage that?
They are still observing. So we created two governance entity for this project. One is advisory committee, as we call it. Another one is much more involved in participating in how the scheme rules are set up, created, and they are much more aware of what we are doing. But in this advisory, all the organizations who signed the letter of commitment are invited, and we have regular meetings with them. We update them on what is happening. For example, from this kind of events, things that are happening outside of our country, but also has impact on the project, being brought to them. So they are pretty much aware of what is happening. I think that's how we are, trying to keep them involved. Right? So I think some of them are just being informed. Some of them are, much more involved in a decision-making process and guiding us on, what is, what works for them, what doesn't.
But you mentioned two levels though. So just to clarify, rather than asking for a financial commitment in order to join the decision-making governance body, it was the ones who were willing to actually put in the work to integrate as part of the POC. They were given decision-making authority within the governance, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
So the core group, right, who are much more closely involved, have integrated their systems, right, with Moja Loop, right? So that was one incentive for them to be more involved, so that they also become a part of the journey and are leading us, right? Not just observing.
Okay. So another thing that I heard about that was everyone talked about the importance of different classes of DFSPs. You wanted to bring microfinance because a lot of them don't even have core banking systems. In Rwanda, we integrated a bank and a mobile money company, which I think was critical. And that's that important point that we want to learn is what are some of the challenges of integrating different classes of DFSPs? The last thing that I think we have just enough time for is, so we talked about the importance of DFSPs and what their level of involvement. We don't have any central banks up here. So say whatever you want. What is we obviously all will say they should be there. What is the level of involvement of the central bank compared to the hub operator in the POC? Are they observing? Are they participating? And then the next question of that is, we talked about the messaging, but how much testing on real money, on settlement, should happen at the POC level? Or is that just way beyond the scope of a POC? So all of those kind of questions combined, of anything you want to talk about, of what's the level, and you're a special case because you're a private sector hub operator, but how it applies to you. But before we get into that, Dr. Himidine, I'd like to give you the floor.
In Guinea, financial inclusion is a national challenge. So that's why we involve first the Prime Minister office itself. And the second thing, we had some discussion with different stakeholders and see how we can put in place a steering committee in the PMO, in the Prime Minister office, with the central bank, 3 representatives from the central banks, and the representatives from the different organizations of banks, FMIs, and mobile money operators, insurance, and so on. So for us, building POC means also align different stakeholders' commitment and goals. So that's why the first thing is to have the steering committee. And the top management support also is very important because the central bank in Guinea is a regulator. So which means his involvement is very important if we want success in this project. And for the FSPs, we didn't want at this stage to have everyone because they don't have the same goals, the same challenges, and so on. So that's why we choose some two FMIs, 2 banks, 2 mobile monies operators, and 2 insurance services. With them, we want to show some quick wins and build on this success to see how we can spread the national POC project. So start slow with some partners, show some results. Based on that, build the national system.
I'd like to get everyone's opinion at some point of 8 financial institutions you just mentioned, and you said we're starting slow. So at some point we can have a conversation about that.
Yeah, definitely. We mean these 8 partners because we want to show some cases like interoperability between 1, 2 MFIs and between MFIs and mobiles, MFIs and bank, MFIs and insurance services.
Understood. I can't wait. Afazal.
Yeah, thank you. Again, for us, the interoperability in Rwanda, it was actually a project that was, I can say, initiated by the government of Rwanda with the purpose of achieving the cashless policy, cashless economy. I think it was by 2024 that at least all Rwandans can now be enjoying the cashless, the digital life, whereby there will not be any circulation of physical money into the market. And when the government of Rwanda came up with this idea through the central bank, in partnership with, I think, with AFR and also other ministries, finance, and ICT. Yes, they came up with this idea, but again, they could not impose this idea on the financial institutions. So what was done was to come up with a proof of concept. It was to come up with a business case on why interoperability is required in Rwanda. And through this, the financial institutions, especially the CEOs, were put into the same room like this. And through that document, through the proof of concept that was mentioned into that project, I think everyone bought the idea of, yes, let's move within the interoperability. So they signed off. That was another part, one phase. But the hardest phase was the actual implementation. As I said, most institutions had bilaterals already in place. And also, there was need for investment into this interoperability. Now, you have the 5 bilaterals you've invested, and they're working, they're giving you money that you want. And now you want to go into this other interoperability. But a bit of this new interoperability was that it was inclusive, that you connect once and you enjoy the whole market. You've connected to everyone. So they bought it in that way. But again, of course, the fact that they had invested somewhere, had it been that they had not invested somewhere, they were not enjoying this interoperability somewhere, but again, also at the expense of the end user, because with these bilaterals, the end user is always charged more. But had it not been that these bilaterals were there, I think with interoperability by now we would have closed with all use cases. So there was that they've invested somewhere, and why they need to invest in this other interoperability. That is one. Then the second part was challenges with the resources, with the systems. Different institutions have different institution capabilities. So some of the institutions looked at upgrading their internal systems to be able to, because in the scheme rules, maybe if I go back behind a little bit, is within this system, there are scheme rules that govern this interoperability. There are those that govern the processor, who is Zero Switch. There are those, the participants the onboarding requirements, of course, the security part of, because as this system has to be secured, because it's going to be including the whole industry. So you need to, as a system, you have to make sure that the system is secured in a manner that there will not be fraud Also, it has to be strong in a manner that is going to, process many transactions within milliseconds. And also in terms of the uptimes. So that is to the processor. And then also, it also goes to the banks. If you're connecting to the system, to the interoperability, you need to make sure that your uptime is at least at 99%. Because when you go down as a system, and at some point, some transactions are coming from another institution to your institution, then they're going to fail. And that is when they fail, it is the whole system that has failed. So all this was supposed to be put into perception to make sure that everything is captured, what is required from the participant, what is required from the processor, and also as the government. And now coming back to the question of their level of involvement. As I said from the beginning, the central bank was one of the pioneers of this interoperability. They played a big role in terms of bringing the industry together, not to order them to go into the interoperability, but to make a business case on why they should join, why they should be onboarded. What are the advantages on their part as the business, as the participants, and also looking at the advantage of the central bank or even the government of Rwanda, because you cannot just go into a system without, having, why are we going into the system, as I mentioned from the start. So at the central point, at the central bank, they looked at all this. What are the advantages on the government part? The advantage, of course, on the government part was to realize a cashless economy. That was the main goal. Now, when you look at the participants, what are they gaining from this onboarding? And then you also go an extra mile because, again, the end user is the most important player in this interoperability, because without them, without the interoperability, because they are the consumers. So you look at the advantage. What are they gaining from this compared to what has been into existence? You look at the cost, you look at the time, and the convenience. So all this was put into perspective, and that's when that's how everyone came up to be involved. Now, on the day-to-day operation of the projects or the POC, of course, you'll always have a steering committee. There's no project, I think, that doesn't have a steering committee. This is a committee that drives the day-to-day operation of the project. They are always involved of any progress. They are always involved of any issues, and they get also involved in solving those certain issues to make sure that the project goes on. And through these steering committees, we also do reporting. Of course, you cannot have everyone on the steering committee coming and ask, where are we, because it would not make sense when everyone comes and, because within the steering committee, everyone has their own ideas of how the project should be implemented. But you'll always have meetings with the steering committees, and then through those meetings, you capture minutes, and then these minutes can be circulated to all stakeholders. So that's the level. As I said, we have the central bank, we have the ministry, MINICT, we have RISA, and also we have the participants. So within these participants, we have focal points within these participants who are getting onboarded, because they also need to be involved within the project life cycle. They have to be involved if there are issues, because as we said, this is a project, this is a POC that involves a lot of stakeholders, a lot of participants. And when you're involved into something, you need to play a part. For example, we may have challenges on the resources, and those resources are not within our reach, within our control, and the other party needs to support so that we move together. So we have project managers from each institutions that are involved, And when you have these steering committees, everyone gives an idea what is holding, what are the issues, what kind of support that they need. So that one is done through those meetings. And then as project managers, we also meet through the steering committees and we update on the progress of the project and challenges. And then we can have, sometimes we suggest how those problems, issues, risks can be mitigated. And then the steering committee from there, they can advise or work with us into solving some of the problems. But at what level do the central bank get involved is when things are not moving. For example, we can sit here and say, by March, we're going to be live. Do we commit? Yes. If we commit, and then at a certain point, we see March, something like 10 days to go for us to be in March, and things are not moving, that's when now we involve the legs of the central bank to support in pushing different stakeholders. Because, you know, within the banks, some of the issues that we've faced is you work with the project manager today, and then tomorrow, when you call the project manager, you tell, I moved. I'm no longer in this bank. I moved to another bank. So this is a big challenge that we faced, where I think bankers move. They always move. They don't stay in one place. And this has been a challenge, a big challenge for us to implement the projects. So with these challenges, we involve the stakeholders, we can say the business owner, the project owners who are the central bank representing the government. One of these days, we've also been involving the MinICT, but that is on high level when things are not really moving. But when things are moving, it's just the steering committee and the project managers. Thank you.
Excellent. I think I could listen to you all day talk about that. So I will probably pull you aside later. Simeon, how much more time do we have? 0. Okay. Darn it. All right. I was really hoping to open up to other questions, but if there are anyone out there who is interested in developing a POC, please come up and let us know. We'd love to hear what it is you'd like to prove, what goals you have in this first stage of your adoption. If you're going to test out Mojaloop, if you're going to test out, what does the central bank want to learn? What do your DFSPs want to learn? What do you want to learn before you actually make the decision that this Mojaloop path is the one for me? And so, sorry that we're out of time, but thank you so much, gentlemen, for all of your lessons. And again, we are a community. Now you've seen their faces, you've heard their names. Please feel free to grab them during the coffee break and ask them more questions. So thank you once again, gentlemen, for sharing all of your lessons.